Hello. I started reading this document, which is a undergraduate's dissertation. So be gentle. She's only an undergraduate. She's doing a dissertation. I was an undergraduate too, and my dissertation when I was an undergraduate was actually when I say it was crap, it wasn't. It was well researched, and it got an A minus. It did well, but it was crap in that none of it was true. I mean, I didn't agree with my own conclusions. But I started to disagree with them like when I was almost like 3/4 of the way through writing the thing, and I didn't want to have to rewrite the whole thing and change my whole argument. So I proceeded to keep arguing for the thing that I didn't think was true. And then my lecturer wanted to publish it, and I had to publish it. It's not true. It was on multiple personality disorder, which I decided didn't exist. But I didn't decide that in the dissertation. In the dissertation, I decided it was caused by spontaneous self-hypnosis in response to childhood trauma. Whereas in fact, I actually came to the conclusion that this spontaneous self-hypnosis, self-hypnosis, is really the ability to convince oneself of things that aren't true, including the fact that one has multiple personality disorder, especially if you've got a therapist who firmly believes in multiple personality disorder, is giving you all the cues and encouragement to manifest it. So it's kind of an iatrogenic disorder. Iatrogenic means created by the doctor. Alright, so be completely open-handed about this. I was a student once too, and when I wrote a dissertation, it wasn't brilliant. Okay, and I know you have done your research. It's not like you went to Man Boobs and got all your information about MRAs from there, which is to your credit. It's called Finding Common Ground, a feminist response to men's rights activism. So I suppose this is the first of a men's rights activist's response to a feminist response to men's rights activism. I did try and read it from the beginning and picking out bits, and I found that a bit hard. Not a bit hard, it was going on for ages, and I wasn't getting to the juicy bits. It took me an hour and 3/4 to read the first 8 pages, and I hadn't even got to any of the juicy stuff yet, so I'm going to jump forward, because this stuff's funny to us. Even within the contemporary MRA movement, there appear to be some divisions, or at least degrees of extremism. Men going their own way, MGTOW, are MRAs who have taken MRA anti-women rhetoric to an extreme. Judging from what I have seen of MGTOW websites, Facebook.com groups and subreddits, it is fair to say that these men truly hate women. Actually, yeah, it is true at some of us. Unfortunately, there exists absolutely no reliable information on MGTOW. There also exists a fairly well-known website called returnofkings.com, whose raison d'etre is denounce sluts and gay men. Return of Kings is run by a blogger named Bruce V, a self-proclaimed professional pickup artist and sexist. It is unclear if Bruce V and the men who frequent Return of Kings consider themselves MGTOW. That's unclear. That's unclear. That's incredible. I don't think they do. No, I don't think they do, or vice versa. But their shared hatred of women and belief that women are only valuable as sex objects raises that possibility. Unlike many contemporary MRAs, the men behind Return of Kings specifically condone gender essentialism. Unlike many contemporary MRAs, the men behind Return of Kings. Yeah, the thing is, you see, bless you, Return of Kings aren't MRAs. So the fact that there is a crucial difference between them and MRAs is not an unexpected finding, because they're not MRAs. They don't identify as MRAs. This next bit is going to really make your side split. Moderate MRAs, those who reject gender essentialism and misogyny, would do well to actively vocally distance themselves from MGTOW and the pickup artist types who align themselves with Return of Kings and other groups like it. Should they? Should they? What do you think the result will be? What do you think the result of that will be then? Let's do an experiment, a thought experiment on that. Let's imagine it had happened. It has happened every bloody day. We vocally distance ourselves from Return of Kings. Every time we see an article that is referring to Return of Kings and MRAs, we go, they're not MRAs. They're not MRAs, and not only do they not identify as MRAs, MRAs do have very little positive to say about Return of Kings. So we couldn't do more to vocally distance ourselves from Return of Kings. What would happen if we vocally distance ourselves from Return of Kings is no one would listen. That's what would happen. Doing so would challenge some of the worst MRA stereotypes and strengthen the credibility of the movement. For our part, feminists should be wary of grouping together all MRAs and ignoring differences of opinion within the movement. It is both unfair and inaccurate to draw no distinction between rabidly misogynistic MRAs and their more moderate counterparts, even if we believe the latter to be misguided, as I do. The truth is that both MRAs and feminists are guilty of spreading misinformation about each other, sometimes unintentionally. So, yeah, I think that you are unintentionally spreading misinformation there. Especially as expressed doubt. And I've got great respect for people who are open about expressing doubt. As I say, I'm very much a pro-doubter. Very much in favour of doubt. This is why when it comes to the end of my videos, I always say this is one blind man reporting on the nature of elephants, because I know that I don't know the truth. I don't have the answers. I'm just guessing, not just guessing. I'm investigating. So anyway, I realised you were having problems working out who's who in the manosphere, so I thought I'd do a chart. Now I'm making a generalisation here, okay? So some people disagree with me. Well, no, I identify as that, and I don't think I'm that. And I go, yeah, I know. I'm making generalisations to make it easy. Okay, so you did identify that actually MRAs tend not to be gender essentialist. It is actually creeping in a gender essentialist term. Actually, there's a lot of gender essentialism in the feminist movement, but I think for the same reason, because both groups have tried to make themselves more accessible to traditionalists, make themselves more palatable to traditionalists. It's compromised, unfortunately. So anyway, but I do think generally MRAs are not gender essentialist, but I think because we've had to pander to traditionalists really to have any sort of like reasonable sized presence, I think gender essentialism has crept in, and that's something that the MGTOWs have criticised the MRM for. I'm already making things complicated. All right, okay. So look, so if we take the root theory is gender essentialist and or social constructivist or whatever, whatever is actually true, we know that. When I talked to the Gad Sad, I said, you know, I agree with the cake analogy. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'd have to go back to the previous video. But you made the analogy that when you talk about nature versus nurture, you're talking about the ingredients of a cake, and it can be all mixture before we bake the cake. Once you bake the cake, it's very hard to tell what is what. I think you were saying that was true of nature and nurture as well. I thought that was fairly true. I just disagreed with how much is nature and how much is nurture, and I thought that there was more nurture than there was nature, whereas he was kind of the opinion there was more nature than there was nurture. Anyway, but broadly speaking, let's say there's gender essentialists, social constructivists, and whatever. Okay. Now, if you start with that as your root theory, that isn't it. That isn't it all done, is it? There's more to come, right? And so if you are a gender essentialist, but you think you're better, right? You think your group's better. You're a supremacist, right? If you think there's big differences between you and you think you're inferior, there's no such word as inferiorists, but I've invented it, so there we go. Urban Dictionary does identify the word inferiorist, so I didn't invent it. Inferiorists, or Uncle Toms, right? Or you could be segregationist. You go, well, we're always going to be different. We're never going to get on. Let's not try to get on. Let's be a separate. Let's move out. Let's just avoid each other. And then you got your traditionalists kind of say, well, we're equal but different, aren't we? We're different, but we're equal. We should just stick to our roles, and that's fine. Then you got your social constructivists, and I'm a bit of a social constructivist, as you'll know from the previous video. And social constructivists come with the ones. I'll split them into two. There's two sides of ways of looking at it, isn't there? Assimilators, because you should be more like us, and appropriators, we should be more like you. And then your whatevers, they liberators. As I say, it's kind of a forced dichotomy to say social constructivists or gender essentialists. The same way as nature versus nurture is a forced dichotomy, and actually everyone's really whatever. It's a question of emphasis, isn't it? It's a question of which of the two theories you favour over the other. And they want choice. So these are the summaries. We're better, so we should rule. I'm sorry for being me. Let's just avoid each other. Equal but different. You should be more like us. We should be more like you. Choice. Okay. So here's how the groups work out for me. So I would say your gender essentialist supremacists are what we say masculinists. Now this is rather confusing because masculinist or neo-masculinist, I think I should have put neo-masculinist rather than masculinist. Return of Kings are also PUAs, but PUAs is more of a lifestyle choice than an ideological choice. But neo-masculinist has been used by both Rushvi and Paul Watson, so I'm going to use it here. This is rather confusing because that is a fairly new coinage, and at the time that Warren Fowler wrote Myth of Male Power, Warren Fowler is as far away from a male supremacist as you can get. He's really down here. He's really one of the social constructivists. He's an MRA really. But in the Myth of Male Power, the word masculine didn't exist then. So he does a chapter where he says, I think it's towards the end, where he says, I'm a feminist when I see a disadvantage of women, and a masculinist when I see a disadvantage of men, something like that. And he doesn't mean in this sense, in the sense I'm using there, because that word hadn't developed that meaning at that point. But anyway, those sort of male supremacists, they call themselves neo-masculinists, and yes, they do write for Return of Kings, but they're not MRAs. Okay, so the next one is inferiorists. They're Uncle Toms. I'm sorry for being me. They tend to be male feminists. They tend to be the male feminists we call manginas. I hate it. I know it wasn't my idea. I'd say self-flagellating males. I do think mangina is really childish, but there we go. We do tend to call them manginas. And also your gynolotrous tradcons, the traditionalists that say, we need women to civilize us. Women are the civilizers of men. I've got to be very careful when I'm characterizing a group in such a way that there's an obvious contradiction in their belief system, and they're not my group, because I may have inadvertently straw-manned them. But if you actually think that women are the civilizers of men, then you believe in socialization for men. So you're only a gender essentialist for women. So you think women are essentially maternal and essentially civilizing. But men need to be civilized, which means men do need to be socialized. So you're only gender essentialist about one gender. Just a little observation there. But maybe if you belong to that group, you would have some explanation for it. I've got to be very careful with the straw man. But as an outsider's perspective, it looks like it's made of straw and will burn pretty easily. And I think women also. You talked about this in benevolent sexism. Women are Wonderful syndrome. Women are Wonderful syndrome are kind of the gender essentialists that are apologetic about being male, aren't they? So they're kind of traditionalists, but they're gynolattrous traditionists. And mangina male feminists are kind of like, what you'll find here is that the male feminists and tradcons are almost interchangeable. Okay, segregationist, separatist. Let's just avoid each other. I said this extreme MGTOW, what they call ghosting MGTOW. They kind of go, we're never going to be, they're never going to be able to get on. Just avoid each other. Getting on is not a possibility. Let's just avoid each other. Traditionalists, they believe equal but different. And they're sort of your tradcon white knights. Oh no, they're your tradcons and your male feminists, they're both white knights. Tradcons and male feminists are equally likely to be white knights, because they both see women as seeking protection, and they both think that men need to be doing more to protect women. Like Owen Jones, like his article of not all men abuse women, but we all must speak out against it. He for she. And the reason I say different is because they're saying that women are weaker. They think that women are fragile and weaker, and therefore need more male help, backup. Right. Okay. I will add, because I've made those two male feminists, there is a third group of male feminists that come on to social construction. So I'm going to come up. Right. So, social constructivists, assimilators. You should be more like us. And I thought this is probably the group that MRAs really belong to, because we are, and I say we because I identify as an MRA, we are pro-equality, but we don't think we should be being feminized to make things more accessible to women. Women should be sort of manning up a bit. So we don't have to have things like safe spaces. The safe spaces really, it's the drawing room expanded into sort of like the broader culture. That's what safe space is. It's like, because in more traditional times, your sort of your white knighting tradcons would have said, I tell you what, dear, men are going to be speaking politics now, so I think it would be best you go to the drawing room so you don't get offended, because we're going to start saying things that are a bit passionate, and we're going to start saying things that are potentially offensive, and we might be rude about somebody's religion and political views and things like that. And so they kind of sent women to the drawing room. And now women came out of the drawing room. No, we can handle it. We can handle it. We don't get offended. We don't need to spend all our time stroking cats, and talking about knitting. So they came out of the drawing room, and now we can all do politics. We all talk about politics, and then we've got lots of women piping up and saying, "Oh, but you're offending me," and it feels like you've come into our culture and then you've tried to change our culture to your culture. Whereas we'd like you to kind of blend in better with our culture, I think. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's probably a good way of looking at it. Yeah, and we don't like things like positive discrimination and stuff like that. No, you should be able to compete. With men on a level playing field. Shouldn't need special help. Okay. So I suppose that's kind of where I placed MRAs is we're social constructivists as simulators. We'd like women to be more like that. There are social constructivist appropriators, which is we should be more like you, which is your pro-feminist masculinity students. So I'm going to own up to another false dichotomy there when I said assimilators versus appropriators. Because actually, I'm talking about, I've driven the two groups to their extremes to make the distinction clearer. But you know, if you're in a simulator, you're kind of a bit of a supremacist, but you're just a social constructivist supremacist instead of a essentialist supremacist, right? And if you're an appropriator, you're really just a sort of social constructivist, inferiorist, rather than a social constructivist supremacist. And it's a false dichotomy, because I wouldn't actually really put myself in either group, and I'm an MLA, so I wouldn't put myself in either group. I would say the in-between of those two groups is somebody who's looking for the golden mean, or at least a Goldilocks region in between, and that's kind of what I am looking at, because I think we recognise that men need to be better at recognising their vulnerability. Otherwise, when we're victims of domestic abuse, we don't recognise our own element of victimhood. And the traditional gender roles put us as men as hyper agents and women as hypo agents. That means women have no agency and men have all the agency in the world. We don't really want to be seen as hyper agents. A lot of our problems come from the fact that we're seen as hyper agents. I'm saying that both sexes should be seen as meso agents. Meso agents being people that have control over their fate, but at the same time are subject to forces outside of their control. And if you look at my video that was a response to Owen Jones, I talk about meso-agency there, and I talk about how the tragedian model of looking at human beings is better than the melodrama model, which sorts people out into victims and heroes and villains. So there, I'm not being in a simulator completely, although to a certain extent I am, because I'm willing to drag women up towards masculinity. At the same time, I'm not being complete a simulator. I am being partial appropriator. But I think that when I'm making the distinction between simulators and appropriators, I'm splitting a group out into where they err on the side of, the bias that they err on the side of. Split that way. One of my criticisms of the Kimmerlites, actually contrary to what I've just said, is they deny male victims of domestic abuse. They deny the existence of male victims of domestic abuse, or they play down the prevalence of male victims of domestic abuse. So in fact, whilst they are appropriating something about feminine culture, they're actually still keeping men at a distance from that element, which is being able to recognise when you've been wronged. I find that's one of my big objections with the Kimmerlites, is their attitude to their insistence on patterns of males dominating females, which is traditional. They reinforce the melodrama roles of male and female by denying that men are victims too. And then you use whatever. You're liberators. And they just want choice. They just want everyone to be able to make their own choices. Now, Zeta males are MRAs. I should really put that, actually. Zeta males are a type of MRA, and it's also, I say, moderate MGTOWs. Zeta males aren't necessarily MGTOWs, but all MGTOWs are Zeta males. These emails basically means I don't need women's approval, and it's kind of that logic that I don't need women's approval, and I'm going to liberate myself from the desire for female approval, because one of the things that forces us into traditional roles is seeking women's approval. I would guess your pro-feminist masculinity students there, by which I'm talking about your Kimmelites saying we should be more like you, they're kind of also saying we don't need approval, but they're saying we don't need male approval. I don't think we need either. I don't think we need either male approval or female approval. So that's kind of a way. So there'll be people that will say, yeah, but you haven't described me at all. That's not how I think. I'm making a broad generalisation, right? But that's kind of how it labels out. So they're all male focused, and female focused. They're all feminists. You see, that's why we can't tell who our bloody allies are, because you're all feminists. You decided that every single way of looking at women's studies and looking at women's issues is going to be labelled as feminist. You won't make a distinction at all. I'm being unfair. Well, I'm kind of being unfair. You would stick an adjective in there. You would go, oh, that's a choice feminist, that is. I don't know about these others. That's why we don't bloody know. I don't think that there are reasons why I don't think MRAs and feminists can work together. However, I do think that it will be mutually beneficial for MRAs and feminists to have more of a dialogue. I'm going to make some amendments to what I've just said. So I kind of went, oh, well, these are all feminists. Actually, they're not all feminists, are they? Now, firstly, I've never met a woman in this category. I have never met a woman that says, I'm sorry for being a woman. I've never met an apologetic woman and wouldn't apologise for being a woman. Ever. I lied. I was watching that. I thought I'd finished. This always happens to me. I thought I'd finished now. I watch back what I've done and I go, no, you've got something wrong there. I need to correct that. I lied there when I said I've never met a woman in this category. And I realised that I lied when I realised that the equivalent I had in the opposite category was gynolatrous tradcom. And then I said about benevolent sexism. And I realised, yes, there's androlatrous. Androlatrous. New word, isn't it? Androlatrous traditional. Is it androlatrous tradcoms? And I guess actually victim feminists kind of come in this as well. Which is anyone that says, oh, you're so powerful, in order to get you to do what they want. So they say, so in a way, this is why I would say victim feminists as well, because they're kind of like going, well, we need you to do this for me. In fact, he for she. He for she, the plea, he for she. That's androlatrous, isn't it? That's saying, we need men to step up and do these things for us. It's androlatrous. That's saying, I can't do this for myself, let me use it for me. So yeah, there's androlatrous feminists, really. Because if a feminist is saying, oh, men are already powerful, and they can do lots of things that we can't, she's been androlatrous. In fact, there's an article actually by a feminist I haven't seen for a while, called Kristal Garcia, who and it was a big insight to me because I never realised it never occurred to me. She said feminists pedestalize men. I thought, what? Are you kidding? I looked at read the article. No, she's right. They do. They do. She thought she grew up a feminist. And she was raised a feminist, and she spent most of her life being a feminist, and then before she sort of like twigged that it wasn't quite right. Did all that time, she thought that men were really, really powerful, and she didn't see that they could be vulnerable. She did, on the other hand, think that they were cruel and despotic and, all these sort of negative things that feminists think about men. But at the same time, she had men on a pedestal. It was a pedestal of power. It wasn't a pedestal of morality. It wasn't like, oh, they're my moral superiors. It was like, they are my power superiors. They have much more power than I do. And you see, that's still an idolatry. And one of the problems that theists face, isn't it, is as a philosophical conundrum, is if God is all good and he's all powerful, why is there still evil in the world? Either he can't do anything about it, in which case he's not all powerful, or he doesn't care, in which case he's not all good. But if you dichotomize God into a God that was all good but powerless, and another God that was all powerful but not good, then that would explain it, wouldn't it? And that's how the traditional roles of male and female is mutually idolatrous. It's going, oh, you're all good. Shame you're so powerless, isn't it? And women are turning to men and going, you're all powerful. Shame you're not all good. Yeah, men aren't all powerful, and women aren't all good. But yeah, it's androlatry, isn't it? It's androlatry in thinking that men are all powerful. And yeah, I think there's both traditionalist women that do that. They say, oh, you're so powerful, protect me. And that's a traditionalist woman that's been androgynous. But also feminists that go, we need men to step up for us and speak up for us and protect us. Victim feminists, they're androgynous too. So yeah, there are androgynous feminists and androgynous tradcoms. And pretty much they're two sides of the same coin. So there we go. It's a little addendum to stick in the middle of my videos. That was it. When I say traditionalist and they're feminist, yeah, sometimes they are. You know, it's what we call domestic feminism. But at the same time, they also tend to be anti-feminist stradcons, aren't they, like the political aptly types. I also have to say that actually, in the same way as there are people in this group that call themselves feminists, but there's also people in this group that call themselves anti-feminists. There's also people in this group that would actually call themselves MRAs. They would say, well, I'm a traditionalist MRA. Because, and of course, the reason they get away with it is because choice. They just go, well, it's my choice, isn't it? I'm probably, for comic effect, I was probably under-exaggerating the overlaps here. And also, I think I fall into more than one group anyway, because I am kind of in a simulator. In that I kind of do think women should be more like us. And I said, you know, those are feminists. See, where do you put Camille Paglia? Because Camille Paglia does have some of this different but equal, but she also has this sort of thing of women should be more like men. A bit more like men, in that she's what she calls a streetwise feminist. And I like Camille Paglia. And this is why Camille Paglia is quite popular with the MRAs, is because she has got that attitude that actually women need to man up a bit and not be not play victim. I just want to talk about the difference, and there is a big difference. You can try to conflate MGTOWs with Eternal Kings. I thought it was quite ironic. And I was thinking about this yesterday. There is a talk of both do talk negatively about female promiscuity, and I think one of the things you've got to understand, because quite contrary to what the feminists think, which is that misogyny is reinforced in our culture and that it's acceptable in our culture, it's not. It really isn't acceptable in our culture. Another little addendum. And misogyny isn't supported in our culture, but male chauvinism is. I'm going to draw a distinction between male chauvinism and misogyny. Because I was talking there about the androlatrous, my previous addendum, which I thought was the last addendum, addendum 2. I was talking about androlatrous feminists and androlatrous tradcons, and we're talking any sort of androlatry is male chauvinism, isn't it? Because male chauvinism means thinking men are superior. Now I said this about Owen Jones as well when I was reading his article. I said, yeah, you have been trained to see men as superior because you've been trained to see that we can hurt women, but women can't hurt us, which means you think we're superior. So you are a male chauvinist. But that's not misogyny. Male chauvinism isn't necessarily misogyny. It's just because misogyny would be hatred, not a feeling of superiority. And we're kind of trained out of even entertaining misogynist thoughts. So when I sort of heard, there's a phrase within MGTOW, when MGTOWs talk about promiscuous women, they talk about riding the cock carousel. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, why is it misogynistic? Because I've been brought up in a society that's quite anti-misogyny. I haven't been brought up in a society that's quite anti-misandry. So my reaction to it at first was to actually go, ooh, and be a little bit defensive of women, because I've got a white knight instinct. I think every man has. But then I actually got analytical about it, and I looked at what was being said, and it's very, very different. It's very different. Yes, Return of Kings do a lot of slut shaming, and they do it from a traditionalist aspect. They kind of think women should be pure, and they want women to be ladies, and then they don't, because there's PUA. So this is one of the ironies with the Return of Kings is that as neo-masculinists, they think that women should be more demure, and as PUAs, they want to sleep with women that aren't demure. They want to sleep with sluts and then complain about them, and then turn to the good girls and say, "You're better. We like you better." You're gonna sleep with these ones. So in that sense, Return of Kings is just like Jezebel for men. Anyway, let's not talk about Return of Kings because I don't support them. I think they're a bunch of dickheads. So, yeah, so when the Return of Kings slut shame, they're doing it in a very traditionalist way. But MGTOW aren't. Just look at that phrase, riding the cock carousel. You know what they're really complaining about? They're complaining about men being objectified. They're complaining about men being used and discarded. They're talking about, why don't you have any respect for the people you sleep with? So they're making a complaint about women that is actually a gender reversal. It's the complaint that women used to make about men a long time ago. So that's quite an interesting cultural shift, isn't it? Just speaking about this from a sort of purely removed anthropological sense, because we're both academics, so I can be anthropological about my studies of even the culture that I am in, just as much as I can be anthropological about culture in general and your culture. I would say there is a cultural difference, big cultural difference between MGTOW and neo-masculinists, and that is an interesting one. Is when MGTOW is complaining about female promiscuity, they're going, you're just using these people. These people mean nothing to you. You're utilising them for your own thrill seeking and not respecting them as human beings. To put it another way, when MGTOW are talking about women who ride the cock carousel, it's a particular phrase that Sandman uses. I'm not Sandman's biggest fan. Anyway, doesn't matter. When he says riding the cock carousel, what he's actually criticising is women who behave exactly like the men from Return of Kings do. So if he can't shame women that behave like the men from Return of Kings, then what right would women have to shame the men who like Return of Kings? Philosophical question for you there. So, I can't really end there. So I think I need to talk about the perceived misogyny of the MGTOW community. This is something else I've got to explain, really. Is you're right, when you look at the misogyny in Return of Kings, very traditionalist misogyny. The thing about MGTOW is it's not traditionalist. They're very anti-traditional roles. The misogyny in the MGTOW community comes stems from the fact that misogyny isn't frowned on. It isn't disapproved of in the MGTOW community. Much the same way as in the mainstream community, misandry is not frowned on. When I first became a men's rights activist, that was my goal. My goal was to say misandry should be as unacceptable as misogyny. And for a while, that was my belief. I think for the first 2 years of being in MRA, that was my belief. And I come around to a different point of view, because I don't think that silencing people is a good way of society evolving. Actually, I think perhaps misogyny should be as acceptable as misandry. I'm not aware that's going to be a less popular opinion. If I'm saying, I'm against misandry, I want misandry to be completely unacceptable, and you go, he just wants everyone to be nice to each other. He makes me sound like a nice person. They want to be nice to each other. Generally, I do want everyone to be nice to each other. When I start saying I want misogyny to be more acceptable, that makes me sound like a terrible human being. But all I'm talking about is finding a golden mean. I'm talking about the fact that misogyny should be as acceptable as misandry. Feminists have been complaining about men for years. There's no element of misogyny you would find in the MGTOW community that is any greater than the misandry you would find in the feminist community, or that there should be some sort of golden mean we find between the two, so they're both as unacceptable as each other and both as acceptable as each other. So the misogyny you're finding, you're reacting to and shocking to you in the MGTOW community is the misandry we get every day in the mainstream community. Yes, they're criticising women, they're criticising women's behaviour. Sometimes. I've got to draw a distinction between the MRAs and the MGTOW, even though there is an overlap. They're two different things, they're two different activities, as it were. MRAs are political, really. They're actively seeking men's rights. They're not trying to change society in any way, well, apart from through rights, I suppose. But they're not looking at the way men and women interact, for example. They're not looking at society, as the MGTOWs are. And in doing so, they're criticising women. And that makes me really feel uncomfortable. But if misandry is acceptable and misogyny isn't, then any attempt at seeking some sort of equality becomes a sort of female supremacist movement rather than an equality movement. I've got to clarify here because other people will bite my head off. I'm not saying the MGTOWs are trying to change women. MGTOWs are changing their own behaviour. They're not changing anything about women. They're just changing their behaviour. They've done a cost-benefit analysis of what society is like, and they realised, you know what our best bet is? My best bet is to just do my own thing and stay out of it. But I think this is why I'm both an MRA and a MGTOW. Because I think MRAs are never going to be able to achieve anything if they're seeking the approval of women. because that will always deter them. They'll always be susceptible to shame, and being shamed out of saying things they need to say. If they're not at least zeta males, not necessarily MGTOW, but they should at least be zeta males, which is that they don't judge their work according to female approval. And not judging your work by depending on female approval does, in fact, open up the possibilities for being more misogynistic, I suppose. Not really talking about hatred, it's all about criticism. Perhaps you shouldn't be saying misogyny and misandry at all. I think maybe you're saying misogyny, you've got a knee-jerk reaction to misogyny. I've always said one of the differences between misogyny and misandry is misogynny is like human faces, and misandry is like a letter in the Chinese alphabet. We can recognise misogyny straight away, even if it's not there. That's what I mean by it's like human faces. Like we're hardwired to recognise human faces. We're hardwired to recognise misogyny. As soon as we see misogyny, as soon as we see anything that looks like misogyny, we go, oh, misogyny! Like a sudden reaction. We just know it, see it automatically. Misandry, we don't see if it's right in front of us because we're not geared to recognise it. In fact, the way to recognise it is to do a gender reversal. So every time you hear a comment a bit made about men, swap the genders on it. And if it feels misogynistic, then there's two possibilities. Either it's misandry, or you're oversensitive to the misogyny. You're seeing misogyny where it isn't. Maybe you're seeing misogyny where it isn't, or it is misandry. You've got to decide that for yourself. One of my maxims, I'm going to split it up on the screen because it's so good. It's so good. I like it. I've used it more than once, and I'm going to make it mine. Identifying a double standard doesn't inform us what the universal standard should be. There's an example of a gender essentialist, female supremacist idea that we hear quite frequently. Is the idea that women have intuition, like an intuition. But actually men have intuition too. We don't call it intuition, we call it a hunch. That's what we call it. And the thing with feminine intuition is it ends there. That's it. I've got a feeling this is going to be true. It makes sense that it's true. Oh yeah, I was got a superpower, I just know things. That's my intuition. It's a confirmation bias on that, on intuition. Because they kind of forget the times that they go, oh, I think this is true, and it turns out not to be true. They kind of forget that. That's the thing about confirmation bias and superstition is we conveniently forget the times we're wrong. As a man, when he has his hunch, he follows it up, he checks it out. Does it pan out? Does the evidence back it up? So that is a positive trait. Skepticism is a positive trait. Now, whether it's a positive masculine trait or not, well, if you want to say that gender is a social construct, then no, it's not. It's a positive trait that we culturally associate with men. We don't culturally associate the trait of skepticism with women. But it is a positive trait. It's a trait that women could and should emulate. I think Mary Wollstonecraft would be very much in favour of women being as skeptical as men, because she was very much in favour of women being reasoning beings. And yet, the sort of female supremacist view is that intuition's a real thing, feminine intuition's a real thing. If you can't criticise that, then why are women going to want to attain what is a positive trait? The positive trait of skepticism. And if they can't see skepticism as a positive trait because it's considered to be a masculine trait, and they think only the feminine traits are positive, because we live in a society where misogyny isn't permitted, they're not going to change it. They're not going to be motivated to change. And if women aren't skeptical, they're never going to do well in science. So you can complain about there's not women in STEM, but women are confident about their lack of skepticism and think their lack of skepticism makes them superior. Well, it doesn't. Lacking skepticism does not make you superior. Your intuition is not a superpower, because intuition is something that men and women both have, but we've got the common sense to follow intuition up by going, let's find some evidence to back that up, see if I'm right, rather than just waiting for it to pan out to find that I'm right and going, I'm always right. So that's an example of how actually women would benefit. There's a bit more misogyny in the world. Women might actually benefit. Take it as constructive criticism. Yeah, constructive criticism. You can't trust your intuition. It's not a magical power. And you can't sleep with loads of men and think that they don't matter and just use them as sex toys and discard them. I'm not saying that all women do that, and I'm not saying that all women believe that their intuition is a magical power, but if there isn't criticism made about it, then why would women change? So feminists for years have been saying things negative about men in the hope that men will change. And we haven't called it misandry. And you will say in your paper somewhere, feminists don't hate men. Fine. Because you're only making this criticism not because you think it's true with all men or that men have to be that way. You're saying these criticisms because you want men to change. Well, how do we get women to change if not allowed to make criticism of them? So I'm putting the case here that misogyny should be as acceptable as misandry, which I think is probably a very controversial place to end, and maybe have some discussion on. Well, all I can say is this is one blind man investigating the nature of elephants, and so are you. You're a blind woman investigating the nature of elephants, and you got some things right about elephants, but you didn't see the whole beast, and I'm hoping that maybe this has given you a bit more insight into what elephants are like. After all, the greatest awareness raiser of all is your own curiosity. Cheerio.